Story 1. Immediately before, we called each other by telephone, watched television, listened to music, played video games, and read magazines and newspapers. Story 2. My 12 siblings and I do not know what our parents did back then. Story 3. All sorts of things, from hunting mammoths to invading Poland. Story 4. We had to ask crushes out by phone or face-to-face. We never knew who was calling. Having someone ring the doorbell was extremely exciting. We dreamed big dreams instead of scrolling on Reddit at 4 a.m., laughing out loud. Story 5. We read and met up to share our lives in person. We saw smiles and shared experiences. We had the freedom that, when you were off work, you could not be reached unless you sat by the phone. It was glorious. If you missed it, I can confirm it was an amazing time. Story 6. I used to read newspapers, hang out at malls and parks, watch television, read books, talk on the phone, go to the movies, sit in coffee houses, write poetry, and listen to live music. Oh my God, I miss those days. Story 7. I used to rent video games and movies weekly at Blockbuster. I had a rather nice collection of compact discs I bought for my stereo. I played guitar a lot, so I would replay sections of compact discs to learn songs. As kids, we went to the park, met friends from school, and traded Yu-Gi-Oh!, Super Ball, Pokemon, and Beyblade cards. We also visited the library to exchange books and went to the movie theater. Story 8. I was a kid in the 1980s and we played outside a lot. Indoors we played with toys or Nintendo. As a teenager in the 1990s, I was online but few others were. We went places and hung out, spending hours talking about nonsense. The random conversations in the movie Clerks are a good example. Everything was cheaper, so you could drive around all evening. Even when we were scrounging for money, we could still go out to eat and catch a movie. After school, when we were working, we would go to Denny's or any place open late. We shared a plate of fries, drank a lot of coffee, smoked cigarettes at the table, and talked about anything. It was nice. Story 9. This may sound pretentious, but I'm trying to get back to that. When I'm done with work, I try to put my phone away and not look at it again until morning. I've started hiking more, reading more books, looking at all the shampoo and conditioner bottles in my bathroom, taking my dog on more walks, and exploring my small suburban town, trying to vibe with the world around me instead of staring at my screen all the time. I find myself watching a bit more television, but I probably did a lot of that before the internet anyway. Story 10. We met, shopped, and argued in person. Then the internet made everything impersonal and heartless. Story 11. That's the thing, they actually did stuff. Now we look at different screens throughout the day. Story 12. It was better. Social media has been a net negative from my point of view. Before the internet, things were different. People were more social, more civil, and generally happier, or at least it was easier to focus on being happy. People were not addicted to getting outraged by others' opinions. Those who wanted to share opinions publicly stood on street corners holding signs, so it was easy to dismiss them as eccentrics. Story 13. We met up and did things outside. We went to the movies or the mall. We played sports. We had social skills. We were not afraid of anything. We talked on the phone. I could go on. Story 14. You know those television shows where kids get on their bikes and ride over to a friend's house, and there is a pile of bikes in the front yard because other kids are there? That actually happened. It was not just whimsical fantasy. Older kids would make plans to meet at the local mall because there was cheap food, an arcade, and sometimes a movie theater. The malls did not kick you out for being 14 and unattended. That was half their clientele. The kicker is that you had to plan in advance who would go, where you would meet, and when, because once people left their houses, you had no way to communicate until you all got there. If someone got lost or delayed, you had to decide whether to stay at the meeting spot because you had no idea how long they would be. If you were smart, you would meet by a payphone whose number you knew, and a friend could call if they found a payphone and had some quarters. It was annoying at the time, but I miss it. When you made plans, people generally stuck to them. Changing plans on the fly was not possible, so flaking out was a bigger deal, and if someone did it too often, you stopped hanging out with them. The social repercussions of being unreliable were much higher. Story 15. They interacted directly with each other and with the environment. Story 16. You had to plan road trips carefully. You used paper maps and researched where to stop. Now we plan along the way. Story 17. I read many books, visited libraries, went outside to play with my friends, and enjoyed life. Story 18. There was always plenty to do. I was never bored. I played video games, read books, went camping and fishing, drew and painted, and, most importantly, had sex. Story 19. Taping shows and movies on video home system tapes, making mixtapes for friends, listening to Casey Kasem's Top 40, talking on the phone, hanging out at the mall. Story 20. It was much more beautiful than it is now. People actually talked to each other instead of staring at screens. They spent more time outside, playing games and hanging out. Less screen time and more real time. Story 21. I used to enjoy riding bicycles, skateboarding, and similar activities. Story 22. You went to the library to find books with the information you needed. You checked the newspaper to see what was playing. You looked in the phone book for phone numbers and addresses. You went to the park hoping to find people you knew. Story 23. Growing up in the late 1990s, we would go on bike rides with no destination, just riding for its own sake. Story 24. People whispered more. Now it's texting. People had to look things up in encyclopedias or ask the smart person in the family. Now it's all search engines and artificial intelligence. Salespeople used to have a leg up on customers. Now customers can be well-informed and harder to deceive. Gas attendants used to know directions. Now people are expected to use a global positioning system and so on. The negatives. As children, we had to socialize more, and we did not have pseudo-communication. We had to actively memorize phone numbers. We played outside together and arranged times to meet again. Today's world feels like there are many pseudo-relationships that are not as meaningful because of technology. We were often forced to shop together. The mall was a place to enjoy shopping or go to an arcade with friends. Now everything can be ordered online, so there is less need for a group of friends to shop with and keep each other company and safe. Story 25. We would read the back of shampoo bottles while on the toilet. Story 26. You answered the phone when it rang and the door when someone rang the doorbell. You read a magazine or a department store catalog in the bathroom. You sat together and listened to music. You held up a lighter at a concert. If you needed an answer or had to write a paper for school, you went to the library. You watched Saturday Night Live on Saturday because you would not see it again if you missed it. Story 27. They worked modest jobs to support themselves, socialized, and started families. The internet made life more convenient, but it is hard to say whether it has made life better. Story 28. Television was the main way to waste your time back then. We would complain that there was nothing on and mindlessly channel surf for hours. Story 29. We were almost never home from after school until sunset, doing the dumb stuff kids did back then. Being outside felt like the right thing to do. Story 30. I had a much higher attention span back then. I would watch whatever was on television, even repeats, and be happy to do so. Sometime in the late 1980s to early 1990s, I got my first computer and discovered bulletin board systems. You used a modem to call another person's computer, played mostly text-based games, downloaded files including adult content, and left messages for other users. It was a primitive version of the internet. We still had game consoles. My first was an Intellivision. Story 31. We had a game master, rolled dice, and updated our character sheets. Story 32. Read books, rented movies, went outside, and met up with friends. There were many things to do outdoors. Story 33. When internet access became available in homes, there was not much on the web. At first, there were news sites, email, and basic web pages. Forums began to spread, along with text-based games. A few years later came images and more advanced sites with online commerce. Brands began to use the web for commercial purposes. At the same time, torrents and other peer-to-peer applications spread, giving people wider access to music and games. eBay started in 1995, became widely used in 1997, and reached Europe in 1999. MySpace launched in 2003. Steam launched in 2003, And online gaming was no longer limited to local area networks. It moved online. Diablo 2 and other Blizzard titles played over Battle.net around 2000 provided an amazing multiplayer experience. Gmail launched in 2004 as an invitation-only test, with 2 invitations per person. YouTube launched in 2005, building on earlier video platforms. Facebook launched in 2004 and became available worldwide in 2006. Instagram launched in 2010. The modern consumer internet is not that old. 25 years ago, it was just beginning. 10 years ago, trends peaked with migration to smartphones and personal devices instead of personal computers. Story 34. I talked to people and went outside to read a book. The mall was a major social event. Story 35. I have honestly been thinking about getting a paper newspaper again, like in the good old days. I used to impulsively take books or comics from the shelf, lie on the couch and read. Now it is this phone all day long. Story 36. I went to the record store, the arcade, the mall, and the movies. I rode bikes, visited friends' houses, and hung out on patios. Story 37. You had to know the correct order of the alphabet to look up words or subjects in a dictionary or in paper encyclopedias. Getting lost down a rabbit hole of knowledge was tedious and impractical. If you wanted the biography of Sting, tough luck. It would not realistically be included in an encyclopedia. Cheat codes for video games were spread through technology and gaming magazines in small appendix booklets. The biggest difference for me is travel. Want to go to a remote temple on a sparsely populated East Asian island? You had to plan your route carefully, have money for a tuk-tuk, or rely on the goodwill of people from a different culture. You could not just use Google Maps to find the nearest paved road. I feel grateful to be alive at this time. Yes, we have vast amounts of pointless data now, but we also have free access to valuable knowledge, and music recorded at any time from every corner of the planet. The same is true for movies. I am not technologically literate enough to give a definitive opinion on artificial intelligence, but so far it seems it can be used for good while also making it effortless to generate a large amount of harmful content, for example, deceit. Story 38. I used to play outdoors a lot, often crafting bows and arrows and shooting across the stream at each other. Moderators, I am not encouraging this. I am just replying. Story 39. You read shampoo bottles and the cards in your wallet on a loop. Story 40. Turn off your computer. Put your mobile phone in a drawer. Then find things to do. Whatever it is that you think of, that is what we did. Story 41. I got up to all sorts of things for which there is no evidence. Simpler times. Story 42. It was great and refreshingly different. We thought beyond online sharing, and it felt mysterious. Story 43. We used to talk about television. Back then, shows were not on demand. We had to wait from week to week for the next episode, so in between we would discuss what had happened and what might happen next. If you missed an episode, you missed it unless your uncle recorded it and you could borrow a video cassette. That season-ending cliffhanger meant waiting months to see the next episode. Story 44. We explored the woods, skateboarded around town, and played sports. Summers were great. Cousins came over. There were no phones or social media. We played video games, watched cartoons, and had outdoor adventures. Story 45. I know this sounds cliché, but we honestly left the house more often. Story 46. I enjoyed going out with friends more and discovering new experiences with fewer preconceived notions. Story 47. We went out into the fields with our ball-bearing guns, made fires, and cooked squirrels we had. We built forts, held ball-bearing gun fights, and lit firecrackers. We accidentally set a field on fire and ruined our shirts stamping it out. We threw snowballs at cars, played ding-dong-ditch, and kicked the can and played kickball, baseball, and football. We rode our bikes to Burger King, camped out at night, and went to the Eagle grocery store at 3 o'clock in the morning to wait for the day-old baked goods to be put out for pickup. We ate cinnamon rolls for the next week. Story 48. Get this, we used to talk to each other. I know, crazy. Story 49. They lived normal lives. What a bizarre thing to ask. Do you think they sat around campfires with face paint and loincloths? Sheesh. Story 50. We used to make our own internet out of tin cans and string. Story 51. We went outside. You should try it sometime. It's awesome. Story 52. We carved art on cave walls and hunted for food. The 1980s were rough. Story 53. I am just barely old enough to answer this. 1. Many more people read books before the internet and they read physical newspapers and magazines. 2. People watched a lot of television, perhaps more than now, but that is just a gut feeling. 3. People had more long phone conversations. That was the main way to interact with friends other than being together in person. 4. People tended to be more engaged with those around them because no one could be on their phones. 5. Waiting in line was more annoying. Story 54. Driving was more stressful, but you were exposed to fewer opinions from Nazis each day. Story 55. I attended many concerts. Tickets for any band were $19. It was marvelous. Story 56. Live life and not have our brains warped by social media, giving everyone around us an inflated sense of importance and significance. We went outside and played in the woods. We hung out with people and talked instead of silently sitting on phones. We had bonfires, long nights at the bar, and long drives to nowhere listening to tapes and compact discs that came from a 700-pound folder of music you fumbled through at stoplights. We gathered around our giant wooden televisions for Thank God It's Friday with our families to watch Boy Meets World and Family Matters. Story 57. You can tell which house in the neighborhood to gather at based on the number of bikes on the front lawn. Story 58. Checking newspapers for movie times and hoping to see the film broadcast on local channels. Physically going to a neighbor's house to ask if a friend is free to play video games. Listening to the radio to hear a song that has been stuck in your head. Story 59. I did not have internet access at home for the first 12 years of my life. I spent a lot of time out in the woods catching frogs and snakes. During the winter, I read a lot. Story 60. We had to go to our friend's house and ask their parents if X could come out and play baseball or something. We were kind of forced to be social. Story 61. In the bathroom, while doing your business, you might read the ingredients on toiletries. Story 62. For entertainment and enrichment, we used books, magazines, radio, television, and newspapers. We played music on instruments or listened to physical media such as compact discs. If we did not know the answer to something, we had to speculate and ask whoever would listen, then look it up at the library later if it was important. Apart from that, we did much the same things we do now when we are not on the internet. You are sometimes not on the internet, aren't you? Story 63. As a kid, I hopped on my bike and started knocking on friends' doors. We would form a group of 7 to 10 people, depending on who was home. Then we would play sports, light things on fire, swim, throw rocks in rivers, go to the store to buy soda and candy, and explore woods and abandoned structures. Story 64. There was much more in-person socializing. We went to each other's houses to play video games or watch movies. We had local area network parties in the same room. We went out together to hang out at the mall or see a movie. We rode bikes, explored woods and creeks, or whatever nature was available depending on location. We made up elaborate and silly games. We got dirty. We did stupid things and sometimes injured ourselves. We had the luxury of not having our mistakes recorded and shared widely. I think we were able to learn and grow much more healthily than younger generations. I am an elder millennial. We could make stupid decisions without them haunting us forever or irrevocably affecting our lives. Our parents, though sometimes negligent, had far less reason to fear us meeting nefarious people out of the blue. We had to go places to buy things, and outside of subject-specific magazines, no one influenced us to purchase anything. Every hobby had a physical magazine, and the excitement when a new issue arrived in the mail was great. I am sad for generations raised with the internet at their fingertips. Not in an old man yells at the sky way, but younger people seem uncurious. Most answers are accessible at a moment's notice, and there is little interest in experimenting in any facet of life. Existence is now contained to a small screen in front of our faces. Older generations are sadly not immune. There is so much more to get out and see and experience. Those of us who lived before the internet missed that life. We had connection and a desire to experience life outside our homes. At that point in society and world events, we had hope. Now we see the world for what it is, and it sucks. We want to change everything, but the disconnected, humanity-deprived existence that has infected many people in our generation and younger ones is a huge roadblock to real change. This got darker than I anticipated. In short, life before the internet was awesome. We just did not fully appreciate it when we had it. Story 65. I rode my bike everywhere all day long, exploring my city and hanging out with friends at malls, parks, and parking lots. My parents never had any idea where I was. From 1985 to 1995, approximately. Story 66. I was there. You went to your friend's place and rang the doorbell. If they were not there, you were out of luck. If they were there, you went outside and played in the street or in the woods, or you listened to cassettes or vinyl records with your favorite music, or you watched television 3 channels at most, or you played 8-bit video games. Your parents didn't know where you were or what you did all day. Story 67. Television and movies, music, video games, sports, books, newspapers, magazines, talking on the telephone, and riding bicycles. Story 68. I was just thinking about how radically different going to the movies was back then. We often stood in line outside to buy tickets. The lobby would be shoulder to shoulder when a couple of big movies premiered, and the auditorium was rarely empty. Story 69. We played outside every day because our parents sent us out. Story 70. We went outside and talked to each other. We went to concerts, movies, and drive-in restaurants. We swam, went whitewater rafting, rode bikes, and did hundreds of other things. Story 71. We had a life. Our friends were actual living human beings that we saw on a daily basis. We didn't play Farmville, we farmed. We memorized dozens of numbers so we could call family and friends from a single device mounted to the wall. Privacy meant a cord long enough to reach the closet. Researching something meant a trip to the library. Printing an essay meant carefully typing it on a manual typewriter that did not have the number 1 or 0. You used the lowercase l for the 1 and the letter o for the 0, and you kept a good supply of correction tape. We were kicked out of the house in the morning during summer. Our parents did not know where we were, did not care, and had no way of contacting us. We played. We had a blast. It was freaking awesome. Story 72. Watching the same movie on a video home system, playing board games, and reading books. I used to watch more television than I do now. Story 73. Bulletin board systems such as the Fido Network and Micronet 800 made the phone bill a bit high, though. Story 74. Collect Pokemon cards. Jump on the trampoline. Play offline video games such as the Nintendo 64. Story 75. Nothing. We just sat there, waiting for the internet to be invented. Story 76. We spent time together, lived in the moment, and had meaningful conversations. Story 77. It was great. People spent more time together and outdoors and spoke more to each other. Nowadays, people cannot interact naturally offline. Story 78. I had a meeting spot for football, cricket, tennis, and similar sports where whoever showed up played pickup games. I always knew someone would be there at peak hours. Story 79. Not too different as long as you are someone who leaves the house and has a social life. For me, that means spending time in the rehearsal space with the band, hanging out in pubs, and going to movies and shows. I would watch more movies, watch more television, and read more than I do when I am at home. Story 80. Great. People knew how to communicate face to face. Rooms were full of talking and laughter, not people mindlessly staring at screens. Story 81. We actually played outside. As a kid, I did not have a cell phone until I was about 13, so we would go as a group from one building to another and use the intercom to call the kid we wanted to play with. Story 82. Indoors, we played board and card games. I read many books and listened to albums. Outdoors, we hiked, camped, floated down the river in summer, played with friends, and got together almost every day to play sports. When I was a little older, I liked to drive around aimlessly, exploring the area to see where the road went. Story 83. People read books, played outside, and did not check notifications every 5 seconds. Story 84. In earlier times, people had more children and did more physical labor, so they were busier. Story 85. My perception of the weather, people, and atmosphere was much more acute. Story 86. Everyone had to create their own content every day. Reading, writing, drawing, and so on, rather than consuming what others created for our entertainment. Story 87. People used to go outside, play together, and be creative. My creativity declined a lot since I started being connected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now you cannot even get people to watch a show together because with so much content available, nobody watches the same thing anymore. Story 88. Things are more convenient now, but much of the excitement of life has gone. Personally, I think things peaked with the very first generation of smartphones. They were not as convenient as modern phones, so there was less distraction, but you could still use maps and look up basic information on the fly. Story 89. I read books, hung out at the mall, went to the movies, and visited places such as museums and parks. Story 90. They played board and card games and interacted with each other in person. Children played outside and learned to resolve conflicts and navigate other aspects of growing up. Story 91. We spent a lot of time standing around asking what we wanted to do, wondering where person A was, and showing up at people's houses unexpectedly only to find they were not there. In short, it was awesome. Story 92. Slower and more peaceful, filled with cross-stitching and crosswords. Story 93. You were only friends with people you saw in real life unless both of you made the effort to call or write regularly. You spent a lot of time pointlessly arguing about facts with your friends. Story 94. Les gens se voyaient en vrai, incroyable. Sinon, ils lisaient, discutaient ou jouaient à des jeux de société. Paradoxalement, certaines personnes considèrent que, avant Internet et tout ce qui relie les gens, nous étions plus proches les uns des autres, car nous étions davantage liés dans le monde réel. C'est la question. Est-il mieux d'avoir des centaines d'amis sur Internet ou quelques vrais amis dans son entourage? Story 95. Saber usar una biblioteca, evitar cortarse con el filo de las páginas de los libros, manejar diferentes equipos como cámara fotográfica, teléfono y lavadora, lavar a mano y convivir con otros para preguntar cómo hacer cosas o imaginar cómo se abre algo. Story 96. I dreamed of being able to instantly communicate with anyone around the world through a computer. Story 97. We played outside. I used to leave the house from age 5 on. I went to the woods, walked around, and played. I would find a cool stick and have a galactic shootout or imagine I was the king of a dirt hill. When I got a little older, I started carrying a machete around age 8. We built forts and hideouts and climbed the riverbank to explore little caves. When I was 10 or 11, my dad let me take a .22 rifle to the woods to practice shooting and get better. In short, we used to live, grow, and learn. Just be home before supper time, Mama always said. Story 98. I played in the forest, built forts, crawled through drainage pipes, and placed shopping carts 40 feet up in a tree as a lookout spot. Regular kid stuff. Story 99. I can speak from the perspective of a child whose parents were strict about going out. I read, watched movies, drew, painted, and sometimes wrote. Occasionally, I would leave the house and go to the mall or the movie theater. When I needed to relax, I would lie on my bed and listen to music. I inherited my uncle's 1970s high-fidelity sound system and listened to records I bought secondhand or to the radio. I feel that most people now listen to music on headphones while they are doing something else. I recommend treating listening as an activity in its own right and letting your mind take you somewhere while you listen. Drugs are not required. Story 100. Life was pretty fun. Board games with family and friends were enjoyable. People sat and talked. They wrote letters. They went outside to play. Imagination was stronger as a child. Story 101. You could have that lifestyle now if you and your friends put your phones away and essentially live an 80s lifestyle. And yet here we are. Story 102. When I was a kid, I read cartoons and books, watched television, listened to the radio, played outside and with toys inside, used a Commodore 64, and drew, painted, and sculpted. Story 103. People talked to each other face to face. The best part was that conversations were usually civil because being a jerk tended to have consequences. Story 104 Fight. Most people would get 5 to the eye for 90% of their interactions on the internet. No cameras and bodyguards for the manlets to hide behind. Screaming, "It's just a prank," only excites us more. Story 105. I had sex in real life. The internet is the greatest contraceptive. Before that, it was television. Story 106. We spent hours a day talking on the phone with friends. Our parents would pick up and hang up the phone to indicate they needed to use it. We also had crippling anxiety every time we wanted to talk to our boyfriends because we had to call their house line and ask their parents to put them on the phone. Story 107. We had to call the movie theater and listen to a 10-minute recording of showtimes. If we missed anything, we had to call back and repeat the process. Story 108. Playing video games on Nintendo or other consoles and going to arcades. Movie theaters, musicals and plays, sporting events, and concerts were all cheaper. Eating out at restaurants. All of the above were much more affordable than they are now. Story 109. I watched television and listened to the radio. Print magazines were a big part of my life growing up. 17 magazine ran a monthly page showing what high school students from a random school around the country were wearing. It was like a street fashion blog, and I always raced to that page. Growing up, I had pen pals. I exchanged letters with a boy named Daniel in Ghana and a girl in Maine named Anna. House parties were more common then. I know the instinct is to blame the coronavirus pandemic, but they were already becoming rare before that, with some exceptions. My parents held themed backyard parties that drew more than 100 people. Most of my friends cannot imagine that kind of party at their house today. We have pictures of a costume party we threw in 1985 that still baffles me. It was not Halloween, just a summer costume party for no reason. We also used to toilet paper houses and run from the police a lot. Story 110. I played Pokemon on a Game Boy while wearing a hat in which I tucked a landline phone to talk to my cousin, who did the same. Story 111. I would be outside from sunup until sundown. If it rained, I would stay home and play video games, and my parents would complain that I was not outside. Story 112. We walked or biked, sometimes several miles each way, to play video games with friends. Story 113. Went outside to play, met friends and family in person, played video games and watched movies. Story 114. I used to read a lot more and spent time watching television, but I no longer have one. Story 115. I watched television and videos. I read the nightly newspaper and magazines. Story 116. Growing up, we watched television and videos and played football and cricket outside with friends. When home game consoles became more popular in the 1980s, we played those as well. Information was found in libraries or reference books at home if you had them. Most households had a dial-up telephone, so you arranged plans at school or agreed to call someone at a certain time to see if they wanted to hang out, play games, or play sports. When the adults went to the pub, we children were often left in the beer garden or, in some cases, the car park to play. That seems crazy now. Music was on long-play vinyl records or cassette tapes, and later on compact discs. We would go to the town center to browse the record shop. Our price was the main one in town, but shops like Woolworth's and W.H. Smith also sold records and tapes. Story 117. We played outside. We went to the park, the library, and the cinema, met friends in town to go shopping, and sometimes went to the arcade. There were no mobile phones, so if you agreed to meet outside at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you had better be there. I would call my mom from a payphone to get picked up, but I used a reverse charge call so I did not have to spend money. I grew up with 3 siblings and many children on the street, so there was always something to do. We used to make prank calls and play knockdown ginger a lot. Story 118. If there was something I wanted to know, I had to look it up, which meant a trip to the library. I made a list of items to check out so I would not forget before my next visit. That left plenty of time to sit and wonder about things. Story 119. We used to ask our parents what they did before the internet. They all gave the same answer. They watched a lot of television. Story 120. I read many books and wrote stories and poems. I sang and danced to music in my room. Sometimes I hung out with friends or my parents. I watched television and played Nintendo and Sega games. I used to sit by the windows of our house and wonder about the people walking or driving by, and those on airplanes and trains passing nearby. I thought deeply about the history of my town and the people buried in the cemetery next to my house. We were the cemetery caretakers. Story 121. Age 2 to 6. I played with my brother, with Lego, with cars and action figures, and with toy guns, first sticks then plastic or metal replicas. I read a lot and hardly watched television. Age 7 to 13. I played with my brother or friends with Lego, with Joe and Star Wars action figures, and played outside games such as tag, kick the can, and baseball, or just wandered around. In the evenings we watched some television and movies such as Star Wars, Flash Gordon, and Indiana Jones. I got a Commodore 64 and played the Gold Box Dungeons and Dragons games constantly, and I did a lot of reading. Age 14 to 15. I played with friends, mostly role-playing games, hung out outside skateboarding or riding bikes, played more computer games, watched more television and movies, and still read a lot. I was usually at a friend's house or had friends over and was rarely alone. Age 16 to 18. I hung out with friends, played Nintendo video games, watched many movies and less television, did some partying and drinking, played role-playing games with friends, and spent time with girls. I still spent time reading. Story 122. I went outside and interacted with other people, learning what their lives are like through verbal communication. Felt strange. Story 123. We sat in stasis, waiting for something to happen. Then suddenly the world awoke. Story 124. I worked during the day, attended college at night, went to concerts and ball games, played sports with friends, and went on dates. Story 125. Personally, I read far more books before smartphones came out. I used to read at least 2 books a week. Now it is more like 1 a year if I am lucky. I feel the internet and smartphones in general have actively made us dumber. Story 126. I rode my little Schwinn many miles from home without telling anyone where I was going. I was home in time for dinner. Story 127. Read books. Watch television. Play basketball with friends. Story 128. We read cereal boxes and telephone directories, waited for the latest retail catalog and the next Playmate, played with earthworms, beetles, and spiders, walked aimlessly with friends after school, and carried Walkman players and boomboxes. We owned video games and were not subscribed to any online services. We learned how to tie knots, pitch tents, start campfires, and cook outdoor meals. We smelled the breeze outside and our mother's fresh, clean laundry. And we touched grass. Story 129. I live in Southeast Asia. Before the internet was widespread, all the neighborhood kids used to get together after dinner to play games, tell horror stories, and have question and answer sessions. It was such a memorable part of my childhood. Story 130. They actually went out and met people. Now they are doing it online. Story 131. Tended the fire and prayed to our pagan gods for the sun to return. Story 132. People read books and magazines, listened to records, went out to play, and went to the mall. Television was the main home and family entertainment, including regular shows and renting videos from the video store. Story 133. Everyone went out to different places and danced to music. Story 134. As Xennial kids, we played outside mostly unsupervised. We read books, went to the mall, and played with toys and make-believe. We made up our own crazy dances but never had them recorded, thankfully. We wrote actual letters to friends and mailed them. Those were the best times. We actually felt alive. Story 135. We rode our bikes to the corner store to steal candy, and we smoked weed in the woods. Story 136. If we needed to know something, we looked it up in a sometimes outdated encyclopedia, or consulted the card catalog in the library to find a book. Story 137. We built bicycles from the parts of broken ones, went on summer rides, and explored the woods. We had to knock on someone's door and ask their parents if we could come to play. No one could keep us in the house, and when it was time to go home, our parents more often than not had to find us by searching the nearby streets. Story 138. I looked things up in manuals. If all you know is the internet, you might wonder how people coped before it. If you lived before the internet, you would not miss what you had never had. Story 139. Same as we do now. I was in my late teens and early 20s in the pre-internet 1990s, so the local newspaper was the key source for everything. It was published around 1:30 in the afternoon every day and could be bought easily from a newsstand or any local shop for less than £1. It provided the news so far for the day and details of evening events. Monday editions listed all the gigs and nightclub events for the week ahead and gave information about local bands. Thursday editions carried local job vacancy listings. Friday editions featured large center pages of houses and flats for sale and rent. There were even Lonely Hearts dating adverts and massage services in the back pages every day, if you felt the need. Story 140. We wandered around town. We hung out in third places that were free to be in, and many people came through. You knocked on doors to ask if your friend could play. Whoever found the biggest stick was Gandalf by default, and the rest of the roles were based on stick sizes. We committed many misdemeanors. We built things with leftovers taken from construction sites. Story 141. I remember not being angry because I wasn't constantly bombarded with awful realities that I couldn't do anything about. Sure, we had the news, but it wasn't entirely dedicated to sensationalism. Story 142. We went outside. The gameplay loop was poor, but the graphics are incredible. Story 143. We had to remember our friends' parents' phone numbers. We rode our bikes everywhere. Later, when we wanted to meet, we made arrangements and people would just show up and never cancel. It was great. Story 144. I did the same things as before. We were more immersed in our activities. Watching television and cartoons took 100% of our attention. We did not scroll TikTok or message anyone while we watched. We also went out more, riding our bikes or just hanging out. Story 145. People watched television and videos, went to the movies, listened to music, played games, and read books and magazines. It was basically the same stuff everyone does online but offline. Only the medium changed. Story 146. We used to go out more. Finding information required more effort depending on the topic. For example, you had to call for movie times or just show up at the theater and hope the film you wanted was playing. If you were interested in international films or anime, it was much harder to keep up with new releases unless you spoke those languages. The internet made the world smaller and more accessible, but going out and social activities began to decline. Story 147. Read the back of shampoo bottles while sitting on the toilet. Story 148. We had a large set of books filled with knowledge. If you could not spell a word, you had to look it up in a different book full of words. Whenever you traveled, you needed a large piece of paper with drawings of roads that was folded in a particular way, making it very hard to refold after you were done with it. Story 149. Buying or selling secondhand items was a nightmare. You had to pay for advertisements in local newspapers, could not add photos, and had to check supermarket billboards. It was nearly impossible for potential buyers to actually find an advertisement. Story 150. Go to the library and bookstores. Read newspapers and magazines. It was wonderful. As for music, records, and for listening on the go, transistor radios and the Sony Walkman. Story 151. I was born in 1971. For fun, I read books, watched the 4 or 5 channels we had, and played the Atari 2600. For school, we used encyclopedias, and I went to the local college library to research topics using microfiche, magazines, and books. Story 152. Asking strangers for directions like a caveman. Story 153. I went to the movies a lot and read books and magazines. I had subscriptions to Rolling Stone and the American version of Premiere magazine, which was about movies. I did not watch much television after junior high school. I had a couple of shows I tried not to miss, but I did far more reading than watching television. I walked a lot, and sometimes, if I could not sleep, I would go for a drive. Those activities were great for being alone with my thoughts. I loved writing and receiving letters. I also liked to draw. I was never very good, but it was fun to get ideas out of my head onto paper. I created an alter ego, a superhero who was a silver werewolf, and I enjoyed drawing him in different scenes. I think most people did what they do now, but without the internet. People watched sports in person or on television and talked on the telephone. Reality television was not what it is now, but nature documentaries and how-to shows were regularly on the public broadcasting service or syndicated on network television on weekends. A major difference between the era before the internet and now is patience. If you wanted to tell someone something, you had to wait until you saw them. Some of my best ideas appeared when I had nothing else to focus on. When I was a kid, some of the best games and activities my friends and I invented came from being bored out of our minds. Sometimes I wonder what happens to creativity when people are never bored. I suppose it does not matter. Artificial intelligence will be handling our creativity from now on. Story 154. When you had to wait, you just stared at the wall instead of being entertained by your phone. Story 155. I grew up in the 1960s. I read the daily newspaper by subscription, magazines by subscription, and books from libraries or bookstores. I listened to music on the radio or on a record player. I bought albums at a bookstore. When I was a kid, I went out every day and played with my friends after school, playing games ranging from tag to basketball and baseball, street football, or board games inside. We rode our bikes everywhere. I also watched television with my family, depending on what was on the few stations we had. When I was older, I drove or rode my bike to the gym to play basketball. I got into cycling. I went out dancing with friends. I continued to read many books. I was into languages. I studied them from books or by taking courses. I traveled a lot. I also hung out at cafes. When we wanted to buy things, we went to the store. When we wanted to date, we asked someone out in person. It was a good life. Story 156. We used to have what they now call third places. They were places outside work, school, and home where you could go and hang out. The most prominent was the mall. Malls are now dying, but at one time you could go there and spend an entire day. Story 157. We spent months tinkering and building briefcases with built-in Citizens band radios and batteries to communicate with friends. The idea of reaching a friend anytime, anywhere, and talking without time limits was beyond our comprehension. We thought we would change the world with our invention. 1 year later, my dad came home with the first mobile phone installed in his car. Our dreams were shattered. Story 158. I read, bought records, made art, dressed up, had sex, attended live shows and house parties, and regularly used recreational substances throughout. Story 159. My mom said her friend once threatened a Russian soldier with a broken beer bottle during the Berlin Wall days. Story 160. I don't know much more about what they used to do, but they were truly happy. Story 161. As kids before the internet, we played outside all day in every season. We rode our bikes in the warmer months and went skiing and sledding in the snow in the colder months. It was amazing. Story 162. The same as now, but usually with more steps and more communication with other people. Story 163. The internet has made many things more difficult. Traveling used to be simpler. You could turn up at a station almost anywhere in the world, buy a ticket, take a train or a plane, find a cheap hotel, and book local activities on the spot. Now everything must be pre-booked, often far in advance, and dynamic pricing makes travel more expensive. I used to read more, draw, write, play music, work as a disc jockey, do creative projects with friends, and go on long walks. The internet has consumed a large amount of productive real-world leisure time. Story 164. Reading, playing outside, Game Boy. We played street hockey every summer evening with the other neighborhood kids. Far fucking healthier. Story 165. I remember back in grade school when our television stopped working. After school, I would read or sometimes listen to the radio until dinner was ready. Story 166. I grew up in the 1990s, so I only experienced pre-internet life until I was 14. That was partly because we were poor and did not have a computer for a while. I mostly played the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy, and I listened to music. I would have loved to have had the technology we have now, because I did not like going out and interacting with people. Story 167. It was fun. I played basketball and sold bootleg DVDs. We had the internet, but it was too slow, and social media wasn't around. Those were the good old days, when a person could meet their future spouse at a grocery store instead of continuously swiping right on Tinder until their thumb was numb. Story 168. It used to be much easier to socialize outdoors locally. Think how parents now organize play dates for children. Except at a certain age, they give you a bicycle and say, okay, go down the street to the park if you want to see your friend. If you were an indoors person, books, magazines, compact discs, and televisions were your hobbies. With weekly updates, you could talk about the latest trends with friends who watched and read the same things. These were your conversation starters. You read books to find and share information others have yet to discover. Story 169. Well, I was more bored but less horrified. Better safe and ignorant than ruining the means of our downfall. This bloated, rotting carcass of an empire is driven not by reason and hope, but by fear, hate, and ignorance. I could not do that in the 20s. Took me, though. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.